Hello there, my name's Vic Wright, and today I want to talk about raiding and how to get into it for someone who's ready to start. In this, I'm going to be covering both the people who have zero raiding experience in the past and those who have raided before, either in this game or in another MMO. So whether you want to dip your toes into raiding or just dive straight in, I'm hoping I have something here to help. So to start, I want to talk about what raiding is in this game. In Final Fantasy XIV, we have multiple different types of encounters. You have your standard dungeons and trials, which are usually reserved for the story, hard mode dungeons and trials, which are again for story purposes, and then you also have normal raids, 24-man raids, extreme, savage, and ultimate. There's also unreal, but that's really just extreme encounters scaled back up the stats. Normal raids are the story version of the savage raids, usually pretty simple but can be a bit of chaotic fun on the night they're released when everyone's still trying to figure out what you're supposed to be doing. 24-man raids, for the most part, are dungeons made up of 3 parties of 8. They're also similar to normal raids where they're very chaotic on night of release because no one can figure out what you're supposed to be doing straight away. These come in the odd patches in the middle of each raid tier, and they're usually a way to help people catch up in gear, usually through coins you get for clearing it each week that you can use to buy upgrade components to upgrade your tombstone gear. After this we have extreme trials. These are what I view as the entry point for those interested in raiding. If you're interested in doing savage raids, I'd recommend that first you make sure you can at least take out the current, newest extreme trial, especially since extreme trials usually drop weapons, and the weapon's probably going to be really useful trying to get through the raid tier anyway. Extremes teach you the importance of doing mechanics while maintaining enough DPS to pass under DPS checks and enrages. After that you get savage. These are the standard raiding experience in 14, harder versions of the normal raids you might have done. There are usually going to be 4 of these fights a tier, and 1 tier comes every even patch, so 5.0, 5.2, 5.4, etc. These are the main ones I'm going to be talking about today. After these, however, if you want to ascend to a higher plane, there is ultimate fights. Currently there's only 3 of these, there's soon to be a 4th one. We get about 2 in expansion, and at the moment they're usually just older fights, but they bring them back, remake them, add in new mechanics, make it extremely hard, and then release it. They're really just sort of a bragging right type of thing and an extra challenge for people who are really hardcore with raiding, and the rewards from these are usually a title and a fancy glowing weapon. These usually will require a static to be done. I don't think I've really heard of anyone pugging these fights and clearing them. I don't think anyone's even bothered to try, to be honest, because they really require a lot of coordination and it'd be very difficult to clear these without having comms. So as I mentioned before, you should really take a look at extreme fights before starting Savage. These are going to teach you the fundamentals of raiding and help you get warmed up for the harder fights. The drops from Extreme are usually really important too, help you get the item level needed to enter Savage fights, as well as get the damage you need to clear them. When a new expansion comes out, there's usually going to be 2 Extremes available at the start. One of these will drop weapons and the other will drop accessories. Usually in order to help the people who are still going through the story catch up, the raid tier is delayed at the start of an expansion. So farming these 2 extreme trials will let you start with accessories and a weapon to help you out. However, for the next 2 raid tiers, there's only going to be 1 extreme trial released at the same time as a savage tier. These will drop weapons, and the item level of those weapons will usually be the best that you can get at the time early on, only beaten by the tombstone weapon and the savage weapons. One of these will take at least 3 weeks to get, I think, if you're lucky, and the other one takes an entire savage tier being cleared to get, so that's going to be out of the question. Once you have your weapon, you're ready for Savage. Sort of. There's going to be more you can do to prepare if you feel like you need to. We have a few things to help us when we raid in this game. That is preparing food, getting the potions you need, and using Stone Sea Sky to make sure you have the DPS needed. Now food and potions are both things that are often used in Savage raids, food being almost necessary at times to hit DPS checks and to survive certain mechanics due to the health issue. Basically, you're going to always be using food, except for maybe sometimes when you're learning a mechanic. Food is made by culinarians, and every patch that introduces a new raid tier will also introduce new food. When you look at raiding food, it usually gives you 3 stats, with one of them being Vitality. The Vitality is why I feel like you need food even when you're learning a fight, because that health's going to let you survive the really big attacks that the boss does, as well as letting the healers have a less heart attack inducing time. Depending on your job is what food you're going to look at as well. For example, some jobs are going to want to get food that has crit on it, whereas some are going to want to get food that have skill speed or spell speed. Really, it just comes down to what's best for your job, and usually you can find this when you look for best in slots. which usually if you want to find these, you're better off looking in places like the Balanced Discord, because they keep up to date once for every job. Similar to food is potions. Every raid tier releases a new set of potions for raiders, and these act as buffs, increasing a certain stat for up to 30 seconds. These ones you can get away with saving for aim to clear runs or re-clears, since they can be quite expensive. And since they act as sort of a buff, you could be using up to 3 in a fight, which, you'll burn through them real quick. When you look at your opener, if you're looking at a guide or anything, you'll notice there'll be a potion there. This is when you use the pot in your opener to get big bursts of damage. After this, since you're only going to get 2 to 3 off in most fights, you save them for what we call pot windows. Pot windows are basically when all the big buffs come up around the same time and everyone uses a potion to get a huge burst of DPS. It's basically like a reopener in a way. And finally, Stone Sky Sea. Each expansion, the name for this is going to change. In Stormblood it was called, I think, the Circles of Answering, and right now I think in Shadowbringers it's called the Lawns, but most people will just refer to it as Stone Sky Sea, or SSS for short. This is a feature the game has that lets you fight a training dummy to test if you have the DPS needed to beat certain fights. You get 3 minutes to beat it, and the training dummy has a health pool based on the fight you picked and the job you're playing. If you can take this training dummy down, the idea is you should have the DPS to clear the fight, as long as you can do the mechanics correctly and maintain that DPS. As a quick note before we get into the rest of the video, I want to explain how loot works in Savage Raids. So each week you can only get loot from the first clear that week. Clearing a fight will give you a book. Once you have enough books, you can exchange that for a piece of gear. At the end of a Savage fight, there's going to be 2 chests, and between these 2 chests will have something like a ring, a necklace, and a bracelet inside of it. You can roll on all 3 of these, and you can even win all 3, unlike normal raids where you can only get 1 piece of gear from each encounter. Just double check with your party first. Statics will usually pre-allocate who gets what loot to make the party grow stronger quicker, and in Pugs most of the time everyone will just say free for all, roll for whatever you want, but sometimes there might be sort of a left to right situation where everyone rolls on the leftmost piece of gear first, and then whoever wins that will then leave the encounter before everyone rolls on the second piece of gear. That way no one gets more than one thing. But anyway, there's not really a limit on how much you can win on that clear, except for maybe rules put in place by your party. But once all that's done, you can't win anything else for that week. Even if you didn't win anything, you just have to own it and go without for that week. That's why we get the books, because we use the books basically as a consolation prize. If we didn't get any gear for 4 weeks, oh well, at least we can pick up a ring. Another set of things that can drop from these fights are materials. These are used to upgrade your tombstone gear. Now the 2 chests for clearing a fight is actually something else that can change. If all 8 of you haven't cleared for this week, you get 2 chests. But if even 1 person from the group has already cleared, you're only going to get 1 chest. And I think it's 5 people who have cleared, and then you get no chest. Which is why sometimes you'll see party finders with 2 chests, 0 to 1 chest, or page run in the description. 2 chests means they don't want any helpers. 0 to 1 chest means the group is happy to sacrifice 1 or 2 chests so that people who have cleared the fight can come help get the clear for you. And a page run is basically the same thing, but usually it's reserved for the end of a week when people haven't had a chance to get their re-clear and they want to quickly just get the book for that week. And speaking of reset is the time each week when all weekly things like Savage raiding will reset. It's when you'll be able to earn gear from the fights again. So to wrap up, every week you get a book for clearing the fight and a chance to win loot. If you didn't get anything for that week, you wait till the next week for your next chance at loot. When raiding, most of the time you have the option of pugging a fight and just doing it with randoms every time, or you can try and form a static group and progress together. Both of these are good options. I have here a set of pros and cons for each of them that I've made up. I'm going to put them up on screen and talk about them. So, for pugging, the pros are you can go at your own pace, you're not restricted by a schedule, you can play whatever jobs you want, it teaches you to rely on yourself for callouts instead of relying on other people, and you can meet people through raiding. I've met friends through pugging raid tiers that I still talk to today, I still play with today. The cons though are your parties are constantly changing, which means inconsistent progress. You might make it all the way up to a certain mechanic, but then that group disbands, and the next group is full of people who don't know how to make it to that mechanic, so you're going to be going backwards. That's a big downside. There are some pretty salty people out there when you're pugging. Trust me, I've met quite a few of them. You have to rely on pug strats, and there's a lot of potential for deprog. It takes longer than a good static would, and your loot gain is very random. On the other hand though, the statics, the pros are, since you're a static group, you have the same party members every time, which means everything you learn stays learned with that party. You can try convenient strats because of reliable party members who you can pre-organize your strategies with. You can pre-organize loot drops so that everyone gears up at a good convenient pace, or one person just gets all the gear and becomes a monster. Depending on how hardcore your group is, you can clear the entire tier within a week or a month. And the cons are, you can only prog with the static at set times most of the time. Some statics will let you go at your own pace outside of the allocated times, but some don't like that because they don't want people getting ahead of the group. If your job's gear is less of a priority, you could be getting the last person to get any good gear, which could kinda suck. You might be asked to swap jobs in more serious groups. They might be like, oh hey, you're playing a monk, well we kinda want a samurai in the group, can you swap to samurai? Or no, actually we want a ninja, can you swap to ninja for trick attack? You do get a bit of drama sometimes in statics, that's one of the worst parts. And you could be stuck in a static with players who, let's just say, aren't doing too well. They're a little bit tired, if you know what I mean. But these are just a few at the top of my head. But how do you go about finding a static? People will sometimes recruit in multiple places, such as Party Finder in game, the official forums if you go to your specific server's subforum, Discord servers that are dedicated to raiding. They could form from people who know each other in game, various websites, and forums online. Personally though, I think finding ones made from at least one or two people you know and trust in game is the best. Players who you know are good at learning mechanics and performing well, so that way you have less of a random chance of the static not performing as well as you're hoping. But that's not always going to be possible. If you do end up joining a static, make sure that if you join before the new raid tier comes out, you at least go do some practice fights on the current stuff to get an idea of how well you all work together. Make sure the static communicates well, plays well, offers constructive criticism. Nothing worse than being knee-deep in prog when your static just crumbles apart because of arguments. But once you find your static, work out the kinks and get to raiding, it can be a really good environment to raid in. And that is cool and all, but what about those of us who can't get static going? Well, this is my advice for pugging too. Sometimes I hear people claim that it's too hard to pug and you need a static if you want to clear. This is completely not true. I am a believer that outside of Ultimate, nothing in this game is unclearable without a static. If you want to go the route of pugging these fights though, without feeling just like really angry or stressed out or getting burnt out, you really need to think about your mindset. For some people, they prefer the bash your head against the fight until you clear the whole tier method. Works fine, but I feel for most players, especially those who are just getting into Savage, they might struggle to enjoy themselves when doing this, and it might start to feel like a chore. So I want to put one piece of advice out there. You don't need to clear the entire raid tier early on. Seriously, you got months before the next patch, and even more before the next raid tier. If you're playing alone and pugging the fights, it's okay to slow down and go at your own pace. For example, I'm the kind of player who likes to take their time with pugging. I'll go into a fight, learn the mechanics, I'll aim to get my clear hopefully that week, but once I clear a fight, sometimes I might go straight ahead to the next one, and other times I might take a week off. And this has done wonders for me, with real life commitments, working on YouTube stuff behind the scenes, and this time around having the whole visiting family over Christmas thing. There's just so much going on that I need to take breaks here and there. Not to mention that as of the time I'm making this video, I'm in the process of preparing a move and a bunch of other stuff, so I haven't even begun to learn E11S. And as much as I love this game, I do want to play other things from time to time. I imagine if I was in a static, I'd have a different mindset. I'd probably be aiming to clear within the first couple weeks, but I'm not in a static, so I just like to take my time and relax. But what are the downsides to this mindset? Well, while taking my time does help me not get stressed out and helps me enjoy the game more, there is one big issue I still run into. Most players have already cleared the fights I'm up to, which make it harder for me to find groups. This does make things a bit harder when I'm going for the clear run. Sometimes it takes a long time for me to find enough people to go for a full 8-man aim to clear run that hasn't cleared it yet. So sometimes, if I'm doing things later, I have to just take the L, let some helpers come in, sacrifice 1 or 2 chests. This is usually like my last resort before a reset happens, but it kind of helps me when I think about it as those chests I'm not getting, I probably wasn't going to win that loot anyway, so, it's no big deal. But basically what I want to say here is that taking your time isn't the worst thing in the world. We all have real life commitments to take care of, and after all, that shouldn't have to affect your interest in raiding. In fact, that's another comment I sometimes hear. I can't raid because I have so much going on that I can't dedicate 6 hours to raiding a day. Well, you don't need to. If you're such a busy person you can only afford to raid for an hour a night or a couple hours every 3 days a week, then just still go for it. You can still learn a fight, clear it, even if it does take you longer than the majority of other raiders, because time taken to clear a raid tier does not equal your skill level. Some of the best raiders I've ever met started midway through a tier, or just took a long time to get through the whole tier. So when starting out with a tier, you have different paths you can take to make your way through it, with even more opening up if you're in a static. But to keep it simple, I'm going to outline a very common, simple path to help you out. So first off, I'd recommend getting the minimum item level from the Extreme Trial. You can do this by buying the crafted gear available, just make sure to stick to high quality pieces since they have better stats, or you can get Tombstone pieces if you can afford it, or the pieces from the normal raids. Once you have the item level for the Extreme Trial, the next goal is to clear that, farm it for your weapon, which will also give you a nice item level boost for when you're attempting to do the Savage raids. Next up is making sure you have the item level for the Savage raid. If the extreme weapon doesn't do enough, then follow the same guidelines as before. Crafted gear, normal raid gear, tombstone gear, etc. Just remember that the item level you have is the average, so replace the lowest pieces of gear you have before you replace anything else because that will give you the biggest increase. After this, we grab some raiding food, aim for high quality here. You could grab some potions too just to have them at the ready, but they're not 100% necessary compared to food. They're just really nice for if you want to aim for the clear and you're just a little bit short of getting the clear. If you want, you can also go and practice at the Stone Sky Sea equivalent for the expansion. After this, we start raiding. If you're in a static, then the next parts are pretty straightforward. Go in, learn, clear. But if you're pugging, things become a bit different, so I'm going to go into more detail. So first off, you're going to either do a fresh look or a fresh practice type of group. The point of these is anyone who hasn't done the fight yet can go in as a group. They can practice the basic mechanics, see how the start of the fight goes, see how far you can even make it through that without anyone being all, oh, you don't know how to do this mechanic, oh, how dare you, because the whole point of that is to learn the basic mechanics and to just all be new to the fight. In my experience, these usually go for a whole lockout, so expect to be here for over an hour. However, sometimes people do have to go for whatever reason, and if you have to leave, it's no big deal, just tell everyone, hey, sorry, I have to jump out early, and everyone's usually fine with it. Usually party finder listings are split across the mechanics as well, so in one of the current fights, E9S, you have your first look parties, you've got your wide angle parties, you've got your tile phase parties, basically just every core major mechanic of a fight is like a checkpoint category type thing that you can queue up for with Party Finder. You might also notice in the descriptions strategy names, stuff like Akito, Ilya, Sharingan, Hobolala. All these kinds of things are basically just how the leader tells everyone who might be interested in joining what strategy they're going to use for that fight. So a bit of extra advice for pugs is you might want to research some of the more commonly used ones. Just watching a guide for the fight sometimes isn't going to be enough. Because some fights, 90% of the guide will be perfect, but one part of it will need an alternate strategy from a completely different video. So usually you just look up how you do that strategy, and then use the other guide you already watched to fill in the blanks. The reason this is kind of important is because of how pugs are sometimes a bit reluctant to change and adapt the strategies commonly used. That's why they're sort of known as pug strats. These are strategies that usually come up within the first week or two. Someone will make a simple, easy to do strat for a mechanic, they'll make a video on it, and since it's the one most people learn the fight on, and since it's easy to do, most people will pick it up and they'll stick with it. Even if it's very inconvenient for some of us, this happens because of the mindset that when learning a fight early on, if you're confident in the party's DPS, then getting a mechanic done with less headache is more important than the melee being able to hit the boss at some parts, or a healer being in range to heal everyone instead of just half the party. It's a smart mindset really, since the earlier fights in a raid tier aren't too reliant on having high DPS, but you might notice that as the months go on and people come up with better strats, ones that are both safe and give max uptime for DPS or let the healers hit everyone instead of half the party, people still won't do them. They'll still stick with the original strat sometimes. Why is this? I can't really tell you, to be honest. people just tend to stick to the one that's worked up until this point. I mean, I guess after all, don't fix what ain't broke. But sometimes people will adapt, sometimes people will pick up new ones, and you'll start to see a few more groups with the different strats pop up. Especially when people start doing like pass runs and things, and speed kills, stuff like that. But for the most part, pug strats are going to be the way that you're normally going to go from pugging, especially early on. And that's my simple rundown on getting into Savage. As a quick recap for anyone brand new to it, a good path to go would be clear the extreme trial, get the weapon, get the minimum item level, through crafted gear or others, get your food, maybe potions, attempt the training dummies to make sure you can clear the DPS check, get into a fresh practice party finder, and then learn until you're confident and go for your aim to clear. This ended up being way longer than I expected it to be. I'm sorry about that, but hopefully it had good information that's helpful to someone. If you'd like to see more stuff like this, subscribe. I try to put out videos like this more often, and hopefully with 2021 I can increase how quickly I put these videos out. But anyway, thanks for watching everyone. See ya.